Persona games are fun. If you'd ask me why, I'd say because they managed to combine numerous different styles of play into the Persona experience to keep the experience fresh and giving the player plenty of choice at any given time. Whether it's going into a dungeon and battling with some JRPG combat, or pursuing social links, or leveling up social stats, or doing part-time jobs, or whatever activity suits your fancy. Persona as a series is one that has constantly evolved since the birth of the modern Persona game with P3. And to see where the series could go from here, let's analyze each individual core component and see how it's changed with each new installment. Last time we covered the social links and the confidant systems. Today, let's talk about the combat. Persona is a turn-based JRPG, unless you want to be extra and say Persona 5 Strikers, in which case, cool. However, these games primarily operate with an elemental resistance system. Any given shadow or persona could be strong against, weak against, or neutral against any of that game's elements like fire, ice, wind, electric, light, darkness, or physical, whatever. Some are especially strong and may absorb the given element, converting it into a heal or even repel, sending the attack back on an opponent like a Yu-Gi-Oh! Magic Cylinder trap card. This system forms the foundation upon which Persona 3, 4, and 5 are built upon. Persona 3 tends to focus more on this system, with it acting as the core mechanic to play around with. If you strike an enemy's weakness, they'll get knocked down and that character or shadow will gain an extra turn. This is a mechanic present in all three of these personas. But the benefit you draw from this system evolves with time, primarily with P5, but we'll get to that. Because the funny thing is, broad stroke speaking, Persona 3 and Persona 4 are very similar. Their main difference comes down to what version of P3 we are really talking about, and the actual dungeon design, instead of the combat itself. In Persona 3 FES, you don't have direct control of your teammates, and are forced to rely on AI controls. You can set priorities, but you don't have direct control like in Persona 3 Portable, or P4, or P5. I tend to find P3's also just more punishing, just in general, whereas I really struggled in P4 and 5. I can find myself coming up against rather difficult fights in P3 on a fairly often regular basis, even against non-boss fights. Having 3 types of physical attacks can be a part of it, sure, where you have sometimes maybe only one really strong physical-based attack, but maybe it's only for strike, and not pierce or slash, that you use to conserve SP, but if you run up against an enemy resistant to that one type of physical attack, but not the others, well, that's just bad luck. A lot of enemies are only weak to light or dark again, which aren't standard attacks. They're low percentage insta-kill attacks that may or may not land, and can be pretty costly, speaking in terms of SP. However, I would hesitate and push back on calling Persona 3 complicated. It's really just monitoring the elemental rock, paper, scissors matchups and being appropriately leveled, finding a rhythm and sticking to it and hoping the opponent doesn't pull some actual act of God stuff and one-shot you into the next full moon cycle with the power of Mjolnir and Poseidon's trident combined. Just keep a good spread of personas on the protagonist, and with a little bit of perseverance, everything in this game will fall, if you can just find the correct rhythm and pattern recognition. Bosses largely feel like slightly more unique, upscaled monsters, with the most interesting one I faced so far probably being the tank that can split into 2 different enemies, which each do something different and can recombine. Really, it's the only kind of boss I remember what it did. But again, how do you deal with that? Just identify its weakness, and if there isn't one, just apply buffs and debuffs, and then just hit it hard with an element it's neutral to until it's down. Really ain't much else to it. It's cyclical, and each boss is like a different puzzle, but they can all be pretty much solved with the same algorithm. We go to Persona 4, and combat is largely the same, like I said. However, you could call it simplified, with there being a straight-up physical category now, instead of strike, slash, and pierce. I tend to prefer the boss design in Persona 4 overall, as I find them more imaginative and visually striking, but mechanically speaking, it's kind of more the same. There's a handful with a bit more to them, but again, the majority of the differences between P3 and P4 don't really lie in the turn-based combat, but in the mood, the music, the setting, the story, and the dungeon design, unless we're talking about FES here. And if your experience with P3 is with Portable, you will probably notice the similarities, since Portable has direct controls for party members like 4 and Golden. However, you come from FES, and the ability to control your party members will be the biggest culture shock you have here. Personally, I vastly prefer being able to control my party members. Lets me create and execute on my strategies the exact way I want to, and I like that. We really find the change-ups to the formula happened with Persona 5 and Persona 5 Royal. The one more mechanic is leaned even further into, with the addition of the baton pass mechanic, where striking an enemy's weakness means you can pass your additional turn off to a party member. The baton pass is easily the most recognizable part of the P5 combat cycle, and it even receives iteration going from P5 to P5 Royal. For those who don't know, the baton pass is the mechanic where striking an enemy's weakness means you can pass your additional turn off to a party member. And in Royal, by playing the dots minigame, you can give the baton pass additional effects like more damage, restoring the party member's HP, and even their SP. It's an incredibly valuable tool that can be used efficiently in dungeons to conserve your SP throughout a run so you can stay in there even longer and use more SP costing spells. Each persona has a special passive effect that can be min-maxed. New elemental archetypes are added like Psychic and Nuclear, as well as the inclusion of just screw it, let them have guns. An alternate standard attack each party member has access to that has a separate ammo system. Each character's gun is different. Joker has a pistol, Ryuji a shotgun, and On a machine gun, and they all fire differently, do different amounts of damage, and consist of different properties. It adds uniqueness and personality to each character. Not to mention you get a slew of gun-based persona abilities that now exist, and it serves to round out the elemental board in my opinion. Now, the baton pass mechanic is strong. Extremely strong. So strong, in fact, it will almost certainly be the main mechanic you focus in on during your gameplay, and you'll try to optimize this thing every step of the way, because it is so valuable for conserving your SP and for just doing a lot of damage. And you could argue that it can be a little bit repetitive, especially for a 100+ hour RPG where you're using essentially the same strategy over and over again for every mob, since you just try and hit a weakness to then cycle through your entire party, and then laugh as the opponent just dies in misery and pain. And it can make non-boss fights rather trivial, so long as you have the proper setups. I think that's a fair argument, and it kind of started to wear thin on me by the end of my first Royal playthrough, just because of how often I use that one mechanic. However, Royal also gives you other things, like the special combo attacks that sometimes pop up where two party members will perform a small skit and do some damage on the enemy. It's not much, at least in the way of gameplay variety, but it's good enough for a laugh every now and then. And yeah, they can get pretty old as well if you watch the same, 10-20 second cutscene over and over again. But if you cycle through different characters throughout your playthrough, you'll probably get different ones, and I honestly didn't mind the mechanic much. And I liked each individual scene. The fact each scene had different dialogue that could play helped as well. They made a lot of changes to the formula with Persona 5 Royal. You have interrogations at the end of each fight if you can knock down all the enemies, where you can either extort money or items out of them or convince them to join your team, instead of having the card shuffle mechanic that was there for P3 and P4. Futaba is far more useful than Fuka or Rise, providing a ton more buffs, and I would dare say she's even way more powerful. Probably excessively so. I wouldn't mind seeing that toned down in future games. But with Persona 5 in general, they really leaned into putting a bunch of extra mechanics surrounding the rock, paper, scissors elemental design. Light and dark attacks also received a makeover, with non-insta-kill abilities being added to their repertoire, bringing them more in line with the other elements, but however getting away from what made them feel unique in the other games. The Mishima Confidant also gives you XP share, so no one party member is left in the dust, and with the baton pass mechanic allowing you to use party members and cycle through them, you're kind of rewarded for swapping party members in and out each turn to min-max each particular fight, because that's also a new iteration to the gameplay formula, where you can swap party members from the bench onto the main party in the combat. You combine that with the baton pass mechanic, and you can just min-max your party for each fight. But this also means you're probably going to, at least you can, use everybody, which I personally enjoyed, especially with Royal. It rewarded me for using all of my party members, not just sticking to a main 4 and going from there. However, going off that idea, where do we go from here for Persona? Well, I think it's safe to say Persona 6 will probably keep the elemental rock, paper, scissors gameplay. I could see gun being removed, but I imagine it would just be replaced by something else. At least I hope so, because I enjoy that mechanic. It gives each character a sense of uniqueness in terms of their gameplay. And I think the formula of Persona 5 Royal is probably going to be the blueprint going forward. It's big and flashy and generally well-liked. I would also argue it's the most fleshed-out combat system in the series, at least from 3 onwards. Now, I would like to see some variance in the gameplay. I wouldn't mind seeing more iteration on these core mechanics, and possibly introduce another mechanic, so it doesn't just feel like Baton Pass Simulator. Now, I don't think baton passes need to be removed, but something to make the combat feel like it isn't the only mechanic would be appreciated. I feel the boss design of Persona 5 is also here to stay, as each boss felt fundamentally different, had interesting mechanics and unique gameplay scenarios for that specific boss, with individual goals and different strategies you can invoke or not invoke for each boss. It provides varying levels of play, and rewards you for figuring out how the boss works, not just what element it's weak to. I think they aren't going to revert to the styles of P3 and P4 and stick closer to the fanfare and accoutrement surrounding the core Persona combat system that's there in P5. Maybe Nuclear and Physic would go, but I imagine they would probably be replaced with something else. But I liked having a wider swath of elements to work with, personally. And I think they probably would as well, as it gives them more of a chance to be creative with the Persona designs. So I'm going to call the video there for the day. Thank you all for tuning in. My pleasure making the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. Hit the bell icon to be notified for when I upload in the future. And leave a comment down below with which Persona game had your favorite combat loop. Let me know, and let me know why, because I would love to hear your thoughts and hear your opinions and hear your perspectives. Stay safe, everybody. Have a great day. Go play some video games if you can. And I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody.